Okay, so I'd like to call this meeting of the Planning Commission June 25th meeting to order. If we would stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so we were able to start at 7 p.m. Okay, so the role of the Planning Commission is to hold workshops to review and make recommendations to the City Council on all manner of policy and legislative activities. In some cases, we act as a quasi-judicial board for land use cases, which can then be appealed to either the council, the hearings examiner, or the court. Could we have the roll call, please?
Yes. Tel Jensen.
Aye.
Sharon Watts.
Present.
Connie Taylor.
Present.
June Jones. And Frank Occhipinti.
Present.
Okay, so Frank is a new member of the Planning Commission, so would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'll make it quick. I've been living in Woodland since 2006. I was on a planning commission when I used to live in Colorado, and so I have some experience, a little bit. It was a small town. I thought it was very interesting, and that's kind of why I decided to try to do something here. I think land use is really an interesting subject. Also, I do have a PhD in cultural anthropology from the University of Colorado. And my topic of study was somewhat related to land use, had to do with the preservation of Native American, what they call traditional cultural properties, including like Vision Quest areas and things like that. So, and other than that, I actually make a living right now as a self-employed woodworker, cabinet maker, and occasionally I teach, but I haven't taught for quite a while. I'd like to get back into it.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, glad you could join us. At this time, I ask any member of the public who wishes to give testimony for items not on the agenda. We need to approve the agenda? You didn't put that on the agenda.
That's afterward.
Okay, okay. Okay, public who wishes to give testimony for items not on the agenda, please approach the microphone at this time. Anyone? Okay. Your name and address, please.
Is this a different one? It's dark then. Oh, as long as you open it. Sorry. Good evening. Patrick Harbison, Dyking Engineer for Cal's Dyking Improvement District Number 2, 1600 13th Avenue, Kelso, Washington is my official address. Travis asked me to come today in response to some questions that I guess were asked last time. So I thought I'd start with a quick, brief presentation of what the Dyking District is, and then try to answer any questions that you guys have, if that's okay with you, Ms. Chairman?
Okay.
Okay. So, Consolidated Dyking Improvement District Number 2 is a consolidation of two dyking districts. Dyking Improvement District Number 5 was formed in June 5th of 1918, and it was basically the eastern side of the tracks that incorporates from the river to the tracks, what incorporate City Woodland now. And Dyking Improvement District Number 11 was everything west of the tracks. In 1949, they consolidated to form one force in Consolidated Dyking to Improvement District Number 2. This is basically a brief map of the boundary of the Dyking Improvement District. We have levees along the Columbia, levee along the Lewis River, and then the boundary in the northeast corner is natural terrain that blocks the floodwaters. So it also incorporates 3 pump stations, Pump Stations 1 and 1A, 2 and 2A, and Pump Station 3 to remove the water that does get in from the levee to keep the floodwater at a bay that we can manage. The district is fed by 2 creeks, basically. We have Burris Creek coming down from the northeast, and then a small unnamed creek that flows underneath Interstate 5. Burris Creek hits right about where the roundabout and Chevron is. It's part of the recent improvements about 5 years ago of that small little berm that was constructed in a joint venture with WashDOT, CDAD number 2, and the city. Picture of pump station number 1. This is located off of Dyke Road in the very northwest corner of the site. It has 2 separate pump stations. You can see the pump station 1 has a capacity of 51,000 gallons per minute, and pump station 1A has a capacity of 63,000 gallons per minute. Pump station 2 is pretty much the central western point of the Dyking District. It, again, has 2 separate houses and 2 separate, what we consider 2 separate pump stations within one. Pump station 2 has 51,000 and 2A has 36,000 gallons per minute. And then our little baby one. This is located right next to the tracks where the levee crosses under the tracks in the far southern point, basically center southern point. It is only 12,000 GPM. It's one that we are looking at, or we watch very closely as development starts to encroach in that area in the south portion of the city. This is where all of it drains to. So this is one we watch very closely as development comes in. Another little area of the dike that's kind of unique to Woodland is what we call the enclosure structure. This is Highway 503. Comes and takes a turn here. And whenever floods get to a certain point, we put I-beams in these sections. We shut down Highway 503 with permission of WashDOT, and there are ties that go in between the 2 the posts that go in there, and we've had to, my understanding is that it has been done 5 times since the inception of CDID number 2. So there's some trainings for it every once in a while that involve the fire district and the city and the Dyking district. But so we have that here at 503. There's a break in the wall right next to the city's pump station, water pump station, and there's a tiny one that usually just gets barricaded with sandbags. I believe it's a dentist's office now. Maybe it's a realtor's office. That little house that sits right there just up from Burgerville. Some pictures from '96. This is the Tulip Farm. This is the Lewis River. The Lewis River comes back around and swings around here. The boat ramp is right in here, down here in the bottom corner. So you can see where the Lewis River is high, and we just have some small flooding considering the problems that could be happening inside. You also see this was our trouble area during that flood event. The bubbles here you see is actually water coming up through the dike. We've since fixed that, extending the levee with a shelf right here. But the difference from the water elevation here to here is about 10 feet.
How much freeboard was in that thing?
Here?
Yeah.
Probably about 18 inches. We were pretty close. 96 was a pretty bad flood. This is the same flood. These were taken 3 hours after the peak. This is the first chance that our Public Works Director at that point in time could get up in the air. But this is I-5 right here. This is Lewis River Highway. We are east of the dike, so this is the area that's outside of the dike, and that's how it flooded because it was not protected. So you can kind of see the difference. These houses, all these houses were not technically flooded. They are built to a standard that's literally just above. All the streets flooded, but the houses stayed dry. Correct me, right? And that's about all I have. I just threw them. We've seen that map before. So, any questions that you guys have or had, or?
I think, I believe the question that kind of prompted Travis to ask you to come was about, considering expanding our urban growth boundary and adding more development in, flood-prone areas. What are the diking district's kind of, what projections do you have for sea level rise in the future?
So sea level rise, we don't anticipate any real concerns. The levees get certified by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We are currently in that process. They model both the Columbia and the Lewis Rivers and tell us how high that the levees need to be for the 100-year storm, I believe, is what we're certifying this one to. I have 6 districts, and everyone's slightly different. When the Columbia River and sea level, the Columbia River is high enough that the actual sea level rise is not going to impact us to an extent that is concerning to the district. It's mere inches. Oregon State has also done a tsunami analysis.
But over what time period? Inches?
So if the sea level rises a foot out there, your impact, we're almost 50 feet above sea level by the time you get up to us. So the impact this far upstream is minimal from sea level rise. So the Oregon State has actually done studies of a tsunami coming up the river, and by the time it hits Longview, it's at half an inch when it's 17 feet at Astoria entering the bar. So that's another one that we aren't concerned about this far upriver. From development inside the dike, we do watch that closely. We do work with Travis quite carefully to try to minimize impacts. The more impervious area that is created, the faster the water gets to our pumps, and the more the pumps have to work earlier in a storm. The diked areas I would consider is basically a large bathtub. It's the best way to describe it. The river levels affect the water inside no matter what. In the summers, we are still pumping because the river is flowing underneath the levees and coming up. So the water is always going to be there no matter what we do with it. It's just how do we control the water getting to the pump so that they have time to pump out what's there before the next wave hits. And so we're constantly working closely with Travis and the city to minimize or to maximize the time it takes to get to our pumps and keep that as close to natural time of concentration as possible.
So I take it there are no plans to somehow protect the east side of the city, which did flood badly?
So in order to there are 2 ways to create a diking district. The people have to vote it in which case they assess themselves assessments, and construction of levees can start at that point in time. So as a manager, we just manage what's already there. CID2 would not expand that direction. It would be a separate district that would be formed, and if that district determined that they'd like to be part of CDID2, we could consolidate it once again at that point in time.
Right.
The other way to form a district is a flood control zone district, in which the county commissioners can ordain it.
The county commissioners, even though it's within the city limits?
Correct. It's, and it's not all within city, but yes. I think there are some county out there, but the flood control zone district is a county authorized thing that can be done. We only have one in the county, the flood control zone district, and that's in Lexington. The rest of them are voted in by the people.
Okay. Travis, anybody?
Yeah, I just had one. So the railroad, where the railroad is
Yes.
that considered like a dike
No.
at all? Okay.
They will be very quick to tell you that it's not a levee or dike.
Okay.
And one of the reasons they do that is maintenance purposes. To do anything on a levee, you have to get Army Corps' approval. And they don't want to do that. Anytime they change tracks, anytime they do maintenance on their site, they don't want to go through the Army Corps permit process.
Oh, yeah, okay, I understand. But I wonder if it would function. I mean, I don't, if that area in there flooded, would it reach the railroad?
It gets to a certain extent. The northwest corner is your lowest spot in there. Everything kind of flows that direction, which is why the pump stations are up in there.
Okay.
But if you do flood, it can reach the railroad, and essentially it would act as some sort of dike. Same with I-5. It's just we can't certify it as a levee. All right.
Any other comments, questions? Yes, Travis?
If the city were to consider some kind of regional stormwater facility, what are the implications of that for the Diking District, and do you see that as problematic or an opportunity?
It really depends on where it's located, how it's constructed and designed. We talked about that kind of thing with the high school, and if you were around, but if you look at the high school actually raised the site by 3.5 feet just to get their storm ponds out of flood water. And so we work closely with them to do that. Where you put it would be the biggest question about how that stuff's done. And I would look closely at the way Longview and CDID, or number one, did their regional facility. They were not happy with their design. And so we can avoid pitfalls by looking at that and trying to avoid those. But it's a discussion that would be open to having.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone else for testimony about items not on the agenda? Okay, so we will move to the consent items. And do we have a motion for items on the consent agenda, sorry? So basically, we want to say that you're, okay, that you're,
Are you asking for a motion to approve the minutes?
Well,
he's got the script a little bit different this time. So, yes, basically, it's to approve the minutes and the agenda, apparently.
Because it's on the consent agenda, you can do them all as a batch, or you could do them individually if you
Yeah.
prefer.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the minutes from the June 11th meeting and the agenda for the June 25th.
Okay. Do I have a second to approve the June 11th minutes and the agenda?
I'll second.
One
David?
comment on the agenda for tonight.
Mhm.
Under discussion workshop, item 3 is struck. Should not have been there.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so all in favor of approving the two consent items, we'll have a roll call, I guess.
Aye. Oops,
Do a roll call.
Hang on.
As soon as she gets a computer.
I'm a little new to this.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not coming up. So, Tel Jensen,
Aye.
Sharon Watt,
Aye.
Connie Taylor,
Aye.
Frank Okipinti.
Close enough.
Correct?
Occupancy.
Okipinti.
Yeah, Coughlin, aye.
Thank you. It's approved.
Okay. So now we move on to the discussion workshop. So our first item is a presentation. by Gin, is it Gin?
It's GIN.
GIN.
GIN Development,
GIN
yeah.
Development.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Phil Wiest. I'm with GIN Development. We're at, 7223 Northeast Hazeldale in Vancouver. And I'm here to talk about a few items that Travis asked me to address. I don't have a PowerPoint, and honestly, what I'd like to do is share, some of the experience that we have from the development work that we're doing and construction work. We do everything from raw land acquisition and development. We take projects through subdivision, and then we have our construction company, it's Boulevard Homes Northwest, so we do vertical construction, and then we sell finished product to home buyers. So we sort of do the whole process from beginning to end. And I'm not sure what phase in the process you are in terms of looking at your plan. But Travis asked me, let's see, let me pull up the agenda here. I have an email with the bullet points, but I want to make sure they match up. So Travis had emailed me and asked me about the economics of multi and single-family development in this market. And on the workshop, it says the residential market. I'm not super qualified to talk about the entire range of the market. What we typically build and what we try to build, our market niche, is we're trying to provide new entry-level and workforce housing for with nice finishes, basically. And so the market we're targeting is, depending on where you are in, say, Clark County, we're trying to hit the market with brand-new homes for $250,000 to $300,000. Now, in Clark County and Vancouver, it's getting harder and harder for us to do that. We're inching up to $270,000 and $280,000. We're still offering homes at well below the median price, but our prices are inching up, and it's because of the cost of land, the cost of development, and the cost of construction. So it's materials, it's labor, it's across the board. As a result, we're trying to economize on land and construction. I'll go into that a little bit more. Before coming up, I pulled up, there's this, every month I get a copy of this RMLS Market Action Report. It has some Cowlitz County specific information. In the city of Woodland, this is, I think, just maybe for May, they're saying that the average sales price within the city was $262,700, so $262,000, or almost $263,000. In the Woodland area as a whole, it says the average sale price is closer to $516,000. Cowlitz County as a whole is about $250,000. And the other things that I thought were interesting in here is that there are, I don't know what the level of development has been like up here. We have one project, and I'll talk about that a little bit, but it looks like the new listings are up this year over 2016 and 2017. Not by a large amount, but by a small amount, so I don't know where that inventory is coming from. Has there been a fair amount of permitting activity?
So there's been about 50 new units per year for the last 2 or 3 years. And previous to that, it was more in the 18 to 32 range, I think. So it seems like the last 3 years have been supercharged.
Yep. And the average sale price, the graph I'm looking at goes back to about 2013, but yeah, the average sales price has been inching up. It looks like, 10,000 or so per year, and now it's, yeah, in that 260 range. So the market for housing is where we're trying to supply housing. It's a good market. We sell them as fast as we can build them because no one else is offering homes at what, it's an entry-level home, but it still costs $270,000. That's not affordable to everyone. So we build those based on, so what do we look for when we're trying to build those kinds of homes that we think may be affordable, or at least on the low end of the price scale for new homes? First thing we're looking for is zoning, and to get to those price levels, we have to build on smaller lots. We build smaller homes on smaller lots. The project that we have just up the street here is Sequoia Park. It's a 36-lot, narrow lot subdivision that was approved back in 2006. And the approval just sat for nearly a decade, and we bought it just last year and developed it, and now we're under vertical construction. But the lots in there are, I believe, just over a couple thousand square feet each. I've got the plat here. I'm going to double check it. Let's see if I've got a lot size on here. Well, they're roughly, basically 80 feet deep by about 24 feet wide. And that's not unusual for us. We'll go, if we're building, so the Sequoia Park project, we're building, I think, 4 duplexes, and the remainder are 4plexes. And so it's typically maybe a 20-foot wide product that we're building. So it's a 20-foot wide home, 2-car garage, depending on where we are. If we can get to 2-car garage, we try to build those. The homes we're building at Sequoia Park are between 1,650 square feet up to about 1,900 square feet. 3 or 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. So, yeah, that's what we're building here in Sequoia Park, and that's typical of products that we're building across Clark County. But we're finding, as I started off by saying, is that because of the price of land and the price of development and the cost of vertical construction, our costs are inching up, and what we're charging consumers is inching up. $280,000, $290,000, $300,000. So we're going back to the drawing board and trying to come up with even smaller lots and smaller homes that we're going to try out using a couple of planned unit development options down in Vancouver. So do you guys have a planned unit development or planned development ordinance? So the planned development ordinance allows us to come in and say, well, we can't do this under the regular zoning. The lot sizes or lot dimensions don't work, but here's what we're proposing to do, and here's why we think it works. So, for example, we're working on one in Vancouver now that it's going to be, if we're successful, 100% alley loaded. We're going to have some of the smaller homes on smaller lots facing courtyards, so everyone will have alley access to a garage, but rather than having, say, a drive up to the front of the house, it'll be a common shared courtyard as you go up to that. So we're trying to, because the size of each lot is so small, we're trying to offer some additional common green space that folks can use. And the demand for our product is pretty strong. At this point, we can't build them fast enough. There aren't that many people working in the sector of the market that we're working in. There's a lot of folks that are building, in that 350 to 400 to 400 range. They're more typical single-family development lots, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 square feet lot, and more of a traditional home. What I've seen is that in terms of forecasts, we anticipate that sector of the market to soften a little bit over the next couple of years. If there's a slight downturn in the economy, we believe the demand on those sort of middle market products is going to drop, which is why we like the entry-level market and the lower price points across the board. We believe that we'll be more resilient when it comes time for it, when the downturn does come. Excuse me. So in looking at Woodland itself, and I don't have a large zoning map, we just came across this one project we're working on. It was for sale, and we looked at it, we liked it, and we bought it, and we're able to develop it quickly because it's already been through approval. But again, I started off by saying, well, where are we looking? We're looking first for zoning, right? Because we know the type of zoning we have to have in order to be able to get smaller lots approved and build these homes that are in this market segment that we're targeting. And I look at the map of, the zoning map of Woodland, and I don't know if I can move this or not. I mean, there's the multifamily zoning in Woodland is limited to this one area that we're building in now. I haven't looked at what else is around it. Up in here, which appears to be developed, a small piece down in here, and then this here, and this up on the hill. And of course, all the stuff down below is in the flood zone, and the stuff up on the hill, I don't know what that's like geologically. I'm not sure what sort of geotechnical work you would have to do in order to build up there, but there's just not that much multifamily zoning in Woodland. There's a lot of single-family zoning and commercial and industrial zoning, but in terms of what we look for typically, there's just not much available up here. And maybe I may be wrong, but that's what we've found. So other factors when we're looking at residential projects, we like to be close in. So our preference is to be closer in and close to services. We like building in Vancouver because it's relatively close in. The projects that we have in urban Clark County are typically close to transportation corridors. I mean, they're pretty close to transportation corridors and other retail services and employment centers and that sort of thing. So we like accessibility, and that's where we think our customers want to live as well. So we aren't building, larger homes that have a little bit more rural feel. But a lot of people are. I mean, I think the city of Ridgefield right now has, I don't know how many lots coming online. You may know. I mean, I think it's 1,000 or more.
I've heard ballpark that it was over 2.
Yeah. So I mean, Ridgefield's got a ton of lots. Camas has got the same thing with the golf course that was redeveloped. They've got lots for years to come, and those are all sort of more larger, I think, development, larger lots for more expensive homes. The other thing that Travis had asked me to talk about was sort of triggers, density considerations, and are there key points or triggers? And I don't know how to address that other than to say, we're shooting for a price point, and before we do any project, it's got to work in the spreadsheet. We've got to look at the price of the land, how many lots we can get, what it's going to cost to do the horizontal construction, what the vertical construction is going to cost, and then can we hit that price point? So for us, the density, we need to, in order to make that equation work, right? Density is one variable we have to adjust. So in some cases, that means putting in more lots, maybe than most people would think are comfortable, but sometimes that makes the equation pencil, makes a project feasible. So I would say that's a real trigger for density. The other dimension of that is we like to build nice communities. So what do we do to try to control the effects of density? I don't know if anyone's looked around at some of these higher density narrow lot developments. Typically, they're underparked. You see cars parked all over the place. So Clark County and the City of Vancouver, I'm not sure, I'd have to, I will page through your code here in a moment because I went through it and I identified some things I thought would be helpful. But Clark County and the City of Vancouver both require additional off-site parking. I think in the county, I believe you need 2.5 parking spaces per unit. So if you can accommodate them all on-site, then you don't need to have any basically off-parcel parking. City of Vancouver requires one additional guest parking space for every 3 units. We believe that providing that additional guest parking is essential to make these places livable. It gets to be a challenge. One of the ways that we're able to do it is sort of whiteboard over there. I can explain it. Basically, one way to do it, and it's not a typical sort of parking lot configuration, is you just take parking like right out of so if this is your street right away, you just basically carve it out and do 5 or 6 head-in spaces. That's something you can fit in. If you put 3 or 4 of those in a small lot development, it makes a huge difference. The green space I had mentioned before on these concept plans we're working on down in Vancouver, we think those help if you're able to have some common shared green spaces. Alley access helps a lot too. So I think in Vancouver and in Clark County, there's incentive for alley access. When we build units, well, in Vancouver, it's when more than 50% of the units are served by alley access, we get a 10% bump in lot coverage. So we can cover that much more of the lot. In Clark County, it's not 50%. I think it's when you access lots, basically, those particular lots get a 10% bump. In those multifamily districts with attached housing, I think they start at 65% lot coverage. So in the county, when we're building attached homes, in higher density zones that have alley access, we can go up to 75% lot coverage. Lot coverage is a big deal. When we're getting down to lots that are, in the 2,000 square foot range, it's tough for us to go below a footprint of 700 to 800 square feet on the ground floor of conditioned space. If you've got a single car garage that's going to take up about 300 square feet, right? 700 square feet footprint would be, it takes you to 1,000. That's 50%. That's a 50% lot coverage. I think currently Woodland has, 35%?
Yes.
In the multifamily zone? So if you're looking at building a narrow lot, attached, or even detached housing, and you're looking at the smaller lots, I encourage you to look at your lot coverage ratios. And you can put incentives in it too, but 35%, there's just, unless you get a really big lot, that doesn't leave you much to work with. So lot coverage is a big deal. I think the other piece that comes in for us as a practical matter is setbacks. So it's the combination of lot coverage and setbacks that sort of governs what we can do and what we can build on the lot. And again, if we've got a minimum basic footprint of 700 square feet, and that's for the smallest type of product on the ground floor, that's just going to be governed by lot coverage and the setbacks. I think right now in the city's multifamily residential zone, it's 35% lot coverage. It's got a 30-foot minimum street frontage requirement, which, So I would look at all those dimensions. You might consider taking that down to 20. It looks like the minimum width of lots is 24 feet. And again, if we're going to build a fourplex, we'll do 20s all the way across, but the outside lots will be a little bit wider because of the setbacks. Inside lots would be just 20 feet. So we couldn't build those in Woodland because we've got a minimum lot width of 24 feet. So we'd have to build a bigger one. The setbacks, I encourage you to look at those too and provide some flexibility. I think the other way you can soften up some of these developments, particularly if you get alley load, is to allow some nice front porches to encroach into the front setback, open porches with a nice entryway. That helps too. It provides a little additional space on the house, some character to the neighborhood. So I think all of those are important. There's actually a section in here on yard projections in 1720.090, performance standards, subsection E talks about yard projections. So that's somewhere you might consider allowing, a nice, maybe 7-foot deep covered front porch or something. That could really add to the feel of a neighborhood. So Travis had asked me, let's see, there's a few other items. It looks like I've already talked about some of the zoning hurdles. Again, the key ones for us in the segment we're building in, lot coverage, setbacks, and those sorts of things, just because we're trying to do the math to fit all this into a relatively small amount of space. The other big thing is just timing and certainty about how we can run projects through the entitlement process for land division and how quickly we can get basically the site engineered and through development. So some jurisdictions have streamlined procedures. So, and let me try to be more specific. So, when we're out looking at projects, right, part of the equation for us is, it's raining for a good part of the year here. So we try to line everything up so, we're ready to go in the spring. We would like to be able to, be looking at a project one spring and then start in with the development approval process that summer. And then even before we're done with the development entitlement process, the preliminary subdivision approval, we'd like to start in on the engineering so that basically come February, we've got approved preliminary subdivision and approved engineering plans. If we can get all that done in roughly a 9-month cycle, then as soon as the good weather hits in the spring, we can get going. That reduces carrying costs a lot. When you've got $2, $3, $4 million out on a piece of land, the quicker you can move that project and get it built, the less expensive it is, and it lowers our costs, and we can again try to hit that price point. So certainty of process matters, and the speed at which you can move through it. In Vancouver, we've started to. They've got an accelerated process. I forget what it's called, but we haven't used that. But there's nothing in the city code or in the city policies and procedures that prevents us from applying for engineering approval early. So we've started to advance our engineering earlier on in the process, even before we have preliminary subdivision approval. Now, it's at our risk, because if our project doesn't get approved for preliminary subdivision, we're done. But if it works, we get through the process more quickly. And again, that helps us control costs. Travis had also asked me whether sort of building codes consideration are something we spend a lot of time. I don't spend a lot of time working on it. Our designer, Dave, might have more to say about that. But, I mean, the building codes are what they are. There's not a lot of control over that. But what jurisdictions can do to help is to maybe look at the building codes when evaluating setbacks. Clark County, for example, will allow us to go down to 8 feet between buildings. So it's an alternative, either a 5-foot setback or 8 foot between buildings, and that's based on the fire code. So providing flexibility on setbacks can help, provided that you're still meeting building requirements. I think if there's anything else. Does anyone have any questions on any of the material I've
Travis,
covered?
did you have something?
I do.
Yeah, please go ahead.
I'd like you to elaborate on the parking situation. We have so many high-density residential, multifamily, that our streets are just crowded with on-street parking. So I'd like you to really be very specific and tell me how you avoid that. I mean, I understand the 2.5. I understand parking ratios,
Right.
but what's to prohibit that?
Well, you're always going to have on-street parking. I mean, as long as parking is allowed. I think the best strategy is to do alley access. Because if you've got alley access, there's no driveways along the roadway, and you've got the entire frontage of the roadway for guest parking, or for folks that live there. Hopefully, they've got a two-car garage in the back off the alley, and then you've got 0 driveways out there, so people can park on the street. So alley access helps a lot, and the only other way to do it is to squeeze parking in, have, like I talked about, those 5, 6, 7 space visitor parking that you just have to squeeze in here and there throughout the development. And it's been a challenge. We had a project, we have a project that we're developing in, it's in Clark County. It's it was proposed as a 61 lot subdivision. And we had 3 really nice, I think 7 to 10 parking, sort of off-street parking lots, which the county code specifically says you can have. I don't know if you recall that section of code.
It's a dedicated parking?
It's dedicated parking. So like, if you were on the roadway, here, hang on. So if your roadway, yeah, so let's say this is your roadway, or whatever. This is kind of like what ours looked like. Just bear with me here for a minute. We had another one up in here. So the county code specifically provides for these, but, so our roadway, we originally proposed it looked like this. Our roadway goes around, and we had one set of parking here, right? You come around the roadway, another set of parking here, right in off the street, so it's head-in parking. And we had another one up here, head-in parking this way. Well, even though it's specifically allowed by the county code, the county engineer didn't think it would be safe to have the parking on the streets there, even though it's a neighborhood street. But, so we ended up jettisoning it. We'll say, okay, well, if you won't require the parking and you don't think it's going to be safe, we'll get rid of it and add one more lot. So we've got 62 lots to sell instead of 61, but it's not going to be as nice a neighborhood. So my only point is that it helps to have some flexibility. I mean, if you have the additional requirement, how you implement it matters. Because, again, sometimes the difference between a project penciling and not penciling, gets down to that last lot or two. And if you have flexibility in how you implement that parking. But, I mean, that's it. You just have to provide more, because people are going to have at least 2 and probably 3 cars per dwelling unit, right? Sometimes 4 in cases.
Okay, excuse me, Travis, could we write in our code that if it's, there's got to be occupancy per unit, we could say you can only have 2 cars per unit, period. Could you do something like that?
You know, we can't, because the individual purchasing the car is not involved with the development at that point. And so the
But could it be covered could it be covered in another element of our off-street parking issue and that?
No. Unfortunately, we can't, because when we're involved, it's a land use development proposal, and once the lot is created, we have no influence over who ends up buying the lot, or, if it's an older couple with no car, or whether it's a
Well, we could
couple
also
with
adjust our
teenagers.
on-street parking and limit it from parking only after
Yes, now that
8
is...
PM and you have to be out by 6 AM.
Yes, that we could do, and that's within the jurisdiction of the police chief.
Okay.
So parking
But we try to, people own cars. People own, 2, 3, 4 cars per dwelling unit, seems like. And we're just trying to figure out where to store them. I
Well,
mean, because they're not going to go away, at least in our experience, not
Right,
anytime
but
soon.
As a developer coming into our community,
Yeah.
you know, I understand your price point, I understand your need to make money.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want you to leave us with a junky mess.
Mhm.
I think that's an issue.
Yeah.
If we're trying to create a livable community that's attractive, you know, we want partners, not
Mhm.
just dine and dash people who are going to take the money and run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why I'm suggesting that looking at requiring parking, particularly with narrow lot development, additional parking with narrow lot development, but also providing some flexibility in how that's provided, just because, you know, it's tough to fit in, and it's all got a pencil, so. But you do need it,
Thank you.
yeah.
Okay, any, yes.
I'm just a little confused. Are we talking about maybe changing some of the zoning that we now have, or?
So
what?
this is the starting conversation to looking at our zoning for residential and also updating our comprehensive plan about doing an analysis of how much land, developable residential land, is in our growth boundary. So those are both going to be topics of discussions.
But what is paramount is revising the code before we do that stuff, so that when we have developers or people coming in, we have a code that matches our community goals. And I mean, our whole mission between the Joint Planning Commission and the City Council was to revise the code to meet the long-term goals of the community. So you can't leave out, you could talk about comprehensive plan, all these things, but the first thing is to address our code.
Well,
Go ahead.
I understand, you know, what you're saying
Mhm.
as far as we want to do encourage more affordable type of housing, then we have to move kind of in that direction that you're saying, as far as zoning and things like that. So I think that was something
Yeah.
to consider, and I also hear what Connie is saying about what we want as a community is important as well. So, but they're kind of, yeah, just can't play. So, appreciate your
Mhm.
input, and I appreciate your input too.
I think your presentation has been very valuable, very enlightening. I sincerely thank you for this.
You're
I
welcome.
mean, it's not something, you know, wasn't totally unfamiliar to me, but we just have to figure out how it works.
Yeah.
Within our community.
Yeah, and we don't work in every market segment. Again, I told you where we focus, and it's not, you certainly wouldn't want to build your whole community on that model, but it's important to try to figure out how to deliver homes at that low price point, because there's a lot of folks out there who would like to have them. So,
Right. It's
yeah.
also important, I'll just say for your own edification, that, you know, we're 3.4 square miles,
Mhm.
and we have a number of manufactured home, you know, sites scattered throughout the city. We have, you know, a number of apartments, so we have to balance out for our growth, our tax base, and everything else, that we have a nice blend to welcome all kinds of people.
Mhm.
So, I'm going to maybe show my ignorance here a little bit. I'm curious, hearing from you and Commissioner Taylor, what's so objectionable about people parking on the street?
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, no, people will park on the street. It's just where the issues that we see sometimes are in smaller developments with a loop road there's not even parking allowed, and there are people parked up on the sidewalks and all over the place. That's what I was saying with alley access, right? If you've got a 28-foot wide roadway curb to curb, you can have 8 foot of parking along the one side, and it's neat and orderly, and it's okay. Nobody's parking up on the sidewalks. The issue that I see is when people are parking up, blocking everything, there's no room for garbage pickup, there's no room for kids to ride their bikes or whatever, you know.
If my memory serves, excuse me one second, but this will fit into what you're saying, but if my memory serves me correctly, we gave you a variance so you can have a narrow road into Sequoia. So there shouldn't be, there's got to be turnaround for fire trucks, but there's no other room for anything else in that area for parking, is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that there is. Well, the one side of the road, I think, is either signed or going to be signed no parking, because a lot of the curbs are painted yellow. The other side, as a practical matter, you couldn't park there because there's driveway drops. I mean, there's just not enough room
There's
in
just
between the
not
driveway drops,
And
which is
each
why you
one
need the
we
off-site parking,
Make
yes.
sure that each one of your units have a two-car garage.
Yeah. In that development, each one will have a two-car
So
garage.
you've got a driveway too.
You've got your driveway pad that can accommodate two
Right.
cars and the two-car garage. Once you fill it up with stuff, maybe you don't have room for all that many cars, but, and to be fair to us, we bought that project entitled. It was, that's not a project that I think we would design today if we were starting from scratch, but that's what it was on the open market, and we saw an opportunity and got it, so, yeah.
And when you're talking about alley loading, is that, does that look like, sort of traditional grid pattern in the city where you might have alley loading, where it stands to be city right away? Or
It can be handled both ways. It can either be, if the city will take it, it can be a public alleyway. In Vancouver, I think it's, and Clark County, it's 24 feet of right-of-way between, 24 feet of right-of-way, and then a 20-foot paved alley in between. So you've basically got 24 feet between buildings. It can be public, it can be private with a public easement over the top of it. Typically, it's not grid because there's not that sort of large lot development left anymore. We don't have room for grids. Typically, we're buying sort of one-off pieces of land and having to design around it. But if we're able to do a more narrow road, maybe a 28-foot wide road curb to curb, and serve some of the lots with an alley in the back, it helps us fit everything in. Yep.
In your opinion, would Vancouver's or Clark County's be a good model for us to work with? Or would you recommend that we just consider looking at a really good planned unit development code? Because it might be more effective than spending a lot of time on our high-density and medium-density zoning.
That's a really good question. I mean, both Clark County and the City of Vancouver have narrow lot code that we find challenging to work with. Not because I believe we have the same goals as those jurisdictions, but they're challenging to work with just because each development site is a little bit different. So, I mean, I think a well-designed planned development ordinance or planned unit development ordinance can work if the decision process has if there are clear standards and there's a decision process that has some predictability to it. You don't want to go into, because it's going to take a while to get through, right? And if you tie up a piece of land and spend several tens of thousands of dollars getting to the point where you can get a proposal considered, I guess you don't want to get that far down the road and then have surprises come up at the hearing. So I think the decision-making process needs to be pretty well defined. But yeah, having that flexibility would be great, because as I said, in Vancouver, we've got two projects we're going to take through the planned development ordinance because we can't get the sites to work under the current zoning, but we think we have a great development concept. So we just have to convince the decision makers that we're providing all the public facilities, that we've got nice green space and open space, that we're addressing parking. So we'll just have to kind of go through and establish each of those elements on our own without having the code to measure against. So, yeah.
Did you bring any typical plan that what you guys would like to do versus the Sequoia, what you ended up picking up?
I can send Travis some examples of other projects we're working on.
Okay,
Yeah.
that would be great.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about building, we actually have building sets that have been turned in for building permits, both fourplexes and duplexes. So if you want to see what they design and work on, and that would be a place to start then.
Yeah, the floor
Can you
plans.
email those to me?
No,
Uh,
they're too large.
They're too
Yeah,
large?
we don't
Okay.
have those.
The other thing with those are, they're also, for us, it's a different design because we're in the AE flood zone. They're all garage unders, right? So the living space doesn't start up until you hit the first level up above the garage, and the garages are designed to be flow-through, just like you started tonight's workshop. The homes we're designing are built the same way as the ones that flooded in '96, so that if it does flood, technically the water just flows right through the garage.
Yeah, the issue that often comes up, and he brought up the issue of lot coverage. So if our code allows down to maybe an 1,800 square foot lot, and you're limited to 35% lot coverage, so you're really talking maybe a 700 square foot footprint, and
300 of that goes to the garage.
your bottom floor is, well, so that's footprint. So your bottom floor is not living space because it has to be garage or storage, which really means with our height limitations, you could only really go 3 stories, which means at 700 square feet, 1,400 square feet per unit, and being able to pencil out selling a 1,400 square foot unit, it may be awesome because it has 2 parking spaces in the garage and 2 on the driveway, so it's got plenty of parking. But the actual space that's available for living is pretty small, which means once you start getting into, regardless of what the price range is, 250 by the time you're done with development and design and construction, $250,000 for a 1,400 square foot livable space unit is challenging. So it's...
One other thing that might be worth looking at is in Whipple Creek Village, which is our development just down off of 179th here, we're building on 37-foot wide lots. We're building basically attached homes, but they're all single level. So they're master on main single level homes on a 37-foot wide lot. So it's just basically it's 2 homes that they're connected at the garage, and then they go out, and it's a pretty decent sized home. I think we're getting 3 bedrooms in those. So it's a nice floor plan, but we're still able to do it on 37-foot wide lots. Those are going to be a little more expensive than the entry level. Those are more sort of downsizing kind of homes for people who want to move into a single level, but it's another model to consider.
What was that one called?
Whipple Creek Village, and I can send you some of the plans that we're implementing there. We're going to be doing a similar thing over at the Village at Evergreen Landing, which is by the old Evergreen Airport, on that 37-foot wide lot, trying to do as much single-story stuff as possible because it seems like people like that.
So it's kind of like a duplex because it shares a wall.
Exactly. It's like a duplex, but they're on 2 separate tax lots, so it's
Right.
typically called, it's an attached home. Yep.
Would you ever, is that, so you said 1,650 to 1,900 square feet, is that 1,650 like you really don't want to go smaller than that? Would you-
No, we've got some. We're down at 1,450 and 1,550. Some of the homes we're looking at on one of these new projects down in Vancouver, we don't have the layouts done yet, but they're going to be pretty small. I mean, at some point, we've always wanted to have at least 3 bedrooms because you hate to be building a new house with just 2 bedrooms in it. But it appears that there's market demand for maybe a 2-bedroom home, so we can economize there. The difficulty that you get into is that the smaller you go, the higher the cost per square foot. The space that you end up building is the expensive space, the bathrooms, the kitchen, right? All the stuff you've got to have. So that brings up the average per square foot cost. But yeah, once you get down to 1,400, that's pretty small for a new home.
If you, I don't know if you had the lot size to justify that, that's allowed?
Right, well, that's the idea, is to try to find, go with a smaller lot, and I'm trying to think of what the sizes are on those, but they're pretty small lots. say 30 by 40 or 30 by 50 or something like that. But we're going to do 100% alley load. They're really small. Yeah, and I think the idea is we would like to hit the market in Vancouver, at 250, 260 with those. That's what we're going to try to do. And that's, believe it or not, that's affordable. Not affordable in a technical sense, but I mean, there's nothing else you can buy out there that's new in that price range.
Thank you.
Any other questions? You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Okay, Mr. Madsen, were you
Thanks, Tom.
addressing something that he is saying, or?
Sure.
I mean, I wasn't sure at what point you wanted to,
Good a time as any.
okay.
I wish I'd known Phil was going to be here tonight. We could have tag teamed. So, and I'm just going to call you Mr. Oak so I don't butcher you. I'm sure I'm not the first person to do that. My name is Steve Madsen. I am general counsel for Aho Construction. We're I think Book of Lists has us at the 4th largest home builder in Clark County. We have projects all over the state. I think this year we'll build something on the order of about 400 homes statewide. We have, I believe, 3 active developments in Clark County right now, nothing in Vancouver. We operate very similar to Ginn in the sense that we're also vertically integrated from basically the farm field to the backyard barbecue process. We're involved in every step of the way, and really mostly just want to reiterate a lot of the things that Phil said about the need to tailor your zoning in some sense to, I'm not going to pretend a developer can come in and dictate how you're going to zone your property, but on the other hand, there is a reality to the market, and if you zone only what you want, regardless of what the market's doing, you're never going to get what you want. So, what I want to do for just briefly is take you from the 2,000 square foot lot up to the 200 acre parcel. Right now, we've optioned approximately, I want to say about 250 acres just south of Wayland Road here, just outside the city limits. And as Travis indicated, you're going to be going through a comprehensive plan analysis, and we've made a formal proposal that the properties that we've got an interest in be brought into the Woodlands urban growth boundary for residential development.
And Woodland city limits?
Okay, so that's what I want to address specifically what you said about zoning before planning and such. I look at land use very much, I used to study economics in another life, and it's very much like macro and microeconomics. They don't exist independent of each other. Zoning is like the microeconomics. That's what you're doing, lot-specific type stuff. Comprehensive plan dictates the general patterns of development, and so you can't really separate one from the other. The comprehensive plan is the skin, the zoning is the skeleton.
I understand.
Okay, but I just wanted to, I've worked in a lot of different jurisdictions trying to get comp plans done or amended or whatever, and it's rare that you ever get the opportunity to do both your zoning code and your comprehensive plan at the same time. The more you can do that, I think the better off you are. So having said that, Clark County uses, the only other thing I wanted to address was the density issue and where multifamily, single family all kind of plays into the grand scheme. Clark County uses a variety of planning assumptions, and I'd encourage you to look at those. It's one page, it's not a big deal. And among those planning assumptions are growth rates and other things. But one of the planning assumptions that they use is what they call a multifamily, single-family split. And the target split that they use for Clark County comprehensive planning is a 25-75 split. That is 25% multifamily, 75% single family. And I think the reality on the ground right now is if you go into the city, it's something more like about 60 to 65% single family. Go to the county, it's more like 75 to 80. Phil might know better, I don't know. Pretty close, anyway. So they're not too far off on that countywide split. So as you're thinking about how much land to allocate for whatever type of housing you're anticipating coming, just know that that's sort of seems to be the trend in this part of the state. Don't think I have really anything else to say. This is going to be a long, complicated process. You're going to be hearing from me a lot, because obviously we have a vested interest in the process. So I won't bore you anymore tonight, but I'd be willing to answer any questions now or in the future. I'm easy to get a hold of. So.
Any questions for Mr. Madsen? Okay.
I'd like to
Sure.
I guess I could look into it, but just, so south of town, is that in a flood? Is that in the flood?
No, this is all in the Diking district.
It's in the Diking
that Patrick was referring to, yes. And one of the things that does, since you brought it up, is it gives the city a bit of an opportunity, because don't know how familiar you are with Washington stormwater controls, but we've got some of the strictest stormwater regulations in the country, and for good reason. It rains a lot here. But one of the carve-outs to the otherwise restrictive stormwater regulations that all developers have to adhere to is when you are in an area that basically doesn't infiltrate, and in which case, and in a place where you've got a direct discharge into a large water body like the Columbia River. Well, the Diking District meets those standards, because, in other words, you're already below the water table. You dig down a foot out of a lot of the bottoms and you're going to hit water. So that, because the Diking District is already accommodated for that stormwater runoff, it allows developers, engineering developers, to do things more creatively, be more efficient, at least in terms of the density that they can achieve on the land in a lot of cases, because we're in a Diking District the way it's set up. So for a lot of reasons, that Woodland Bottoms area is really optimal for residential development.
So that's,
But for the transportation issues.
so I put the map up.
Oh, okay. So, and I'll just, where this is roughly the area we're talking about in here, east of the tracks, just south of the city limits. White Truck, Wall Speeds are here. Scala's got property here. Our properties are kind of in.
And how many homes are you proposing in that specific area?
We're not proposing any specific number, because what we're doing, in other words, if you're going to zone it residential at all, it's going to be at some density. And so we believe that we can meet whatever density you folks impose. Now, do we want to maximize the density? I'm not so sure. I can't speak to that, because we haven't done development designs on the property. We're not that far down the rabbit hole yet. But, I think we would be looking probably in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 acres, or 4 to 6 units per acre is what we would probably be expecting to build out there. And I would say that we believe that if we got the kind of a ride that Phil was talking about through the permit process, that we believe we can hit about a $275,000 price point with a reasonable single-family home that's not on a postage stamp lot. We'll see. But anyway, that's our challenge for each other through this process, is we can tell you what we'd like to do and what we think we can do, just like Phil said, to the point where it doesn't pencil, and we'll be brutally honest with you. When it doesn't pencil, we'll let you know, and then it's your guys' job to recommend whatever the policy and let the chips fall where they may. So, again, I look forward to working with you for the next few months through this process. I believe February is when the next opportunity that you will have, or the city will have, to formally amend its comprehensive plan.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you, Mr. Madsen. Okay, so Travis, is this residential discussion something separate? this number 2 on the agenda?
It's related, but we were going to talk more about the comprehensive plan and the zoning and kind of the implications, and then have some quick discussions about what you'd like me to do and prepare for our next discussion in July. So right now, we're just laying that groundwork. So I will go to... So if we could, I'd like to take a quick look and maybe do some background to help answer some of these questions. If you could go to Chapter 4 of the comprehensive plan, which starts on page...
No, it's on 13.
13, sorry. Yes, page 13 of 33 of your handout. And some of the demographic information that's in the housing chapter is stuff we will be talking about. I'm sorry, I wanted to go to the land use section. And specifically, I want to go to page 22 of the... Ever to load it. So this is what in the kind of the planning profession that we call the crosswalk. So you'll notice the next 2 pages are the comprehensive plan map and the zoning map. And you'll notice that the comprehensive plan map only has 4 colors in it: residential, commercial, industrial, and parks and institutional. But the zoning page, the zoning map actually has many more colors, and it has multiple commercial zones, multiple residential zones that are represented. So this is kind of where he's talking about there's the general skin of residential, but the actual meat of the bones, or the bones, the structure of it, is laid out in the zoning. So this chart, this crosswalk, indicates kind of what the options are for implementing each one of the comprehensive plans. So for example, residential, it's actually one big zoning category or one big use category that's implemented by multiple zones. And you can see that LDR, which stands for low density residential, 6, and the number behind it represents the number of 1,000 square feet in a minimum lot size. So LDR 6 means it's 6,000 square foot lots. LDR 7.2, which means 7,200. LDR 8.5, which means 8,500 square foot lots. And LDR 10. So that actually means that we have 5 zoning districts that implement our low density residential. And then we have, 4. Then we have 2 zoning districts that implement our high-density residential and medium-density residential. So when we talk about updating the comprehensive plan, if you were to designate something as residential or commercial, you may or may not be able to predict what the actual density in that comprehensive plan would actually equate. So part of the conversation that we're eventually going to be having in that is, do we want to do specific agreements or comprehensive plan designations? Do we want to require specific zoning as part of the comprehensive plan? So we're going to have to figure out a strategy working with the applicants who are interested in being part of our urban growth area and included in our comprehensive plan. We're going to have to develop some kind of game plan to ensure that we don't necessarily include, 100 acres of land and it turns out not being enough, or, including 700 acres and thinking that we're going to get low density, but instead what we get is high density, and the growths don't necessarily match our projected needs versus what the applications are going to come through the door. So this is an important answer to why our two speakers tonight couldn't necessarily give you a firm idea of what the future is going to hold. Because first of all, they're having to make the assumption that you will include land within the growth area. Then the second assumption is going to be that you will honor their request to make it residential. And all of that is going to be based upon your beliefs or trust that they're going to develop a product without necessarily knowing what they're going to ask for at that point. So it requires faith on both sides of the table. Is that a fair? Which is why it's important for them for both the predictability and, for them to sink a lot of money into the design and the application process. There's no guarantee it's going to be approved. So, they have to balance how much effort do they put into the process up front to tell you what they're going to make if they don't know that they're going to get anything, because that's money down the drain. So that's why that part is an important part of the conversation. Now, if you turn back a page, two pages, to page 20. Actually, let's go to page 19. Some of the planning assumptions that the city used in 2015 is in section 3.1. And Clark County, the portion of woodland that's in Clark County is very small, and it's essentially built out. So the possibility of actually receiving growth is totally dependent upon whether that property annexes and chooses to develop. So 1% is either way too high because there's no additional land to develop, or it's way too low because we only have, I believe it's 82 units in Clark County within the city. If that property were to develop within Horseshoe Lake, it's either going to be like 500% growth or 0% growth. So for us to actually kind of estimate a 1% growth rate over 20 years is, the math doesn't work simply because it's really one piece of property. Now, the other assumption that was in there, and that is a 2.3% growth rate for Cowlitz County, and that's essentially 98% of the city is in Cowlitz County. And a 2.3% growth rate is not unrealistic. That equates to about 45 homes per year, and over the last 3 years, it's actually been pretty accurate. But for the 10 years before that, it's probably pretty optimistic, and it wasn't achieved for probably the previous 5 years before that. So
That's a new number, isn't it? The last revision.
Yes. So it was only adopted in 2015, and, well, the comp plan was written in 2015. It might have been adopted in 2016, but actually in 2015 was actually when we started getting that 50-lot trend, probably because stuff started picking up after the post-recession growth. And now that we're looking at entertaining projects from developers who are mainly based in Clark County, like Ginn and Aho Homes, 50% or 50 units per year might actually end up being on the low side, because it's entirely possible that Sequoia Park, which was approved in 2016, it may be realized all 36 units in 1 year. So even with just kind of the mom and pop developments and 1 and 2 homes here and there, we may end up with more than 50, maybe more than 60 by the end of this year. So if that's an indicator of what's accelerating, it's hard to say. Now, the part of the problem that we run into with Table 3, which is on page 20, these are some of the other planning assumptions that were developed in 2015, 2016. And if you take a look, let's see, existing housing units, it's about the 6th or 7th unit measurement down. 1,933 units, and that's an average of 2.7 people per household. Now, I happen to know that the state average is about 2.3 people per household, 2.35, 2.4 people per household. So for Washington state comparisons, Woodland is a little higher, not significantly higher than the state person per household. But the undeveloped residential land, which is right below it, and that's 174 acres. So we can take out all of the residential later phases that have become Meriwether, and so significant amount of that property is developed. Sequoia Park was also part of that calculation, and it has now been fully developed. We also have developers in kind of the northeast corner of town who are looking at reviving the Woodland Creek subdivision, which was 136 units. It was approved in 2006 and expired, so they're having to start again. And then across the street from that is a piece of property next to the fish hatchery, and it apparently has about 36 units that could be developed on that in that neighborhood. So those are really the two developments that I've been talking, or people have talked to me about for potentially applying this year or next. So that 174 acres does not necessarily equate to actually developable land, like the area off Lewis River Road next to the church. It is zoned residential, but it's all in the floodplain and floodway, so it doesn't necessarily represent a buildable capacity. I looked at all of the properties that were in the urban growth boundary for the city of Woodland, and there, by my estimates, are only about 23 acres of residential land that's actually developable in all of our urban growth boundary. Some of it, like the Jehovah's Witness Church by the ball fields on Green Mountain Road, it's unlikely to convert to residential, but that's kind of an example of the constraints within our growth area. The reason why that's important is because based upon the 174 acres, they projected housing units of between 673 and 619, which would put us up in the 3,000 unit range. So it assumes really high densities on all of the property that's available. And the other assumption, and that is a 40-60 ratio of high density versus low density. And so we're starting to get this situation where some of our assumptions are askew, and we wouldn't necessarily be able to meet our growth projections by the assumptions that we've made. So the other thing I wanted to point out really quickly, and that is if you go down 3 more spaces, you get to the projected new commercial zone, or commercial jobs, sorry. And then below that is projected new industrial jobs. Now, the commercial land that we have available for development and the industrial land that we have available in our comprehensive plan, the projections are for approximately 4,900 new jobs within the next 20 years. And at the same time, we have projections for barely 1,200 housing units, and those are really optimistic projections. So the reality is, unless each one of those homes, which will only have, maybe 3 people in the home, we have to have 4 to 5 working age adults who work in Woodland and live in Woodland to actually kind of have a comparable supply and demand of workers. Now, in the past, I understand Woodland has kind of had an attitude of, let them live in Ridgefield or Vancouver or Kalama, and they can drive here. But I think the issues that we constantly are having come up, and that is traffic, and that's kind of a result of the fact that everybody has to drive an average of 24 miles for their commute to work. So that's a census statistical number that I came across. And 24 miles, I mean, that gets you to Vancouver, that gets you to Kalama. So it seems to be an indicator of, we do have a lot of people who drive to town. And when you actually drill down and look at the numbers, we have about a third of our population is commuting out of town. And that's an awfully high ratio when you consider how many of those are probably working age adults who work out of town. And at the same time, we're expecting working age adults to commute to Woodland for the jobs. So we're kind of in this, we seem to be set up to have this disconnect of we're causing traffic because our comprehensive plan kind of dictates it.
Do you take into consideration the people on Green Mountain up on the Heights? I mean, they're not in Woodland,
So they are not in Woodland and they are not part of our comprehensive plan.
but they commute through Woodland.
But they absolutely do, yes. And like, for example, if I remember correctly, we get about, like, over the CC River Bridge into Clark County, we get about 20, if I remember the 2013 numbers, we get about 2,400 trips per day across that bridge coming in. And we actually have a higher number crossing the bridge to go out into Clark County. And those are 2013 numbers, and what it tells us is a large portion of the North Clark County growth is actually coming through the CC River Bridge, or they're coming across the river and coming along Lewis River Road to get to exit 21, simply because there's no real expedient way for them to travel south into Vancouver or Battleground. La Center only has one exit, so we're kind of at this pinch point where a lot of those trips cause traffic here without the benefit of the tax or the stop by of that traffic.
So I might quibble with your suggestion that our comprehensive plan is causing traffic by causing people to commute. As I understand it, we have about the same number of people leaving town for work as are coming into town for work. So it's not an issue of not having enough houses for the people that work here. It's that, for whatever reason, they don't work here and other people do. And I don't, I think, maybe you could say that our projected housing is low, or you could say that our projected new jobs is a bit optimistic. I hope that that's not optimistic. It would be great to have that many more jobs, but I just don't think there's anything. Just, like we can't decide who moves into a house. We can't decide where they're going to work. So I think, ideally that would be just a perfect match and everybody would work here, but I think that's maybe...
Yes, I'm sorry. I was implying that there's a direct correlation between the effects on traffic and the decisions in our comprehensive plan.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's as simple as trying to match our housing to jobs, though, because I think that's just too simple a picture. I think everything about our, and it's not just Woodland, but everything about the development here encourages people to drive. So, that we're surprised it causes traffic is a little bit ridiculous. And I don't think, short of some really severe changes, I don't think we're going to change it other comprehensive plan.
Well, and I think where we're going in the discussion of density and affordability provide us an opportunity to attack it from a different direction in terms of if we could lure as many of those potential workers to live in town and to use the other facilities and the other services that are available in the community. That's probably the most efficient way for us to accommodate both growth and the growth of the economy and the growth in jobs.
Absolutely. Agree with that.
I don't know if this is the right time to bring this up, but, when I first looked at this map, I thought, this is kind of a crazy town. Because there's hardly any place for people to live, and there's this giant industrial area. Why is that? I don't understand. Why is there so much of the town set aside for industrial growth?
You know, the comprehensive plan is a direct reflection of the policies of the leadership at that time. And so with each successive update of the comprehensive plan and the conversation and code updates, like what we're dealing with, it's really the Planning Commission's responsibility to help guide those kind of discussions. Now, when you get a chance to come by the office and we get a chance to talk, probably the two most important maps in my entire office are our water and our sewer system map. Because a lot of that area is zoned and is part of the comprehensive plan for industrial, but there is a large swath, maybe the bottom 2/3 and everything west of the tracks doesn't actually have services available to it. And part of our discussion in the upcoming comprehensive plan is to figure out, okay, not only that we need the pipes, the question is how do we size the pipes properly so that the residential growth might be leading the charge, but how are we going to fund getting the pipes big enough that we can accommodate that industrial growth, that once the employees are here or the housing is planned for the employees, we start drawing some additional development because the utilities are planned for and in place, so that we're not replacing, because if we're going to put in pipes, the residences might need a 6-inch pipe, but the city might need a 12 or an 18-inch pipe. So rather than putting in a 6 and then replacing it with an 18, we need to figure out how to get a 12 or an 18-inch out there and how we're going to fund that and how the pieces fit together so that theoretically we get some houses, then we get a business, then we get more houses, then we get more of the businesses to come along. Because right now the model is we want the businesses to come along, but they're not coming along because there's no water and sewer. So that's part of why we're talking about the residential, to help potentially kickstart some of that utility services that will result in commercial and industrial growth.
I wasn't on the Planning Commission when this comprehensive plan was developed, but part of the idea is that, there are some projects in some form or another that could be big projects down there. And Woodland has, we don't have a very solid tax base. By getting more commercial development and bringing businesses in, building houses and doing that, that increases our ability to sustain ourselves and make Woodland a better place. So the commercial development is a key component for the long-term viability and health of the city.
What do you make more money from? Residential taxes or commercial? Which, I'm just curious, like all this industrial, how much does that contribute to the funding? Not that we really know that. My guess is that that is not contributing as much to the funding of the town as residential.
Well, last
I don't know.
Last time I looked at the budget, we had about half of our revenue was from sales tax and half was from property tax. So it's kind of mixed. We obviously, Woodland doesn't get all the property tax that's collected here, and we don't get all the sales tax that's collected here. Right now.
But then,
I understand their balance.
it's a two-edged sword because we might get more taxes, but then we have to spend more money on like maybe upgrading our sewer system or upgrading, like you were saying, right?
Exactly, yeah. Because
So-
if we're getting more tax, it doesn't matter if it costs us more in the end. We're running on a treadmill. That's an important point.
Yeah, and we also have to bear in mind that the funding comes from different sources for different things. So Stuff like roads don't necessarily have a directly related source of revenue for them, because everybody can drive on the road, but you might buy your gas in Ridgefield, in which case Ridgefield gets the gas taxes, but we get the traffic on our road. Whereas other things like if you hook up to city water and sewer, that money goes directly into the city's coffers. Whereas your property taxes, you might pay $1,000 worth of taxes, 500 of that might go to the school, $50 might go to the Dyking District, $2 to the Cemetery District, $8 to all the junior taxing districts, and the city is left with maybe $300 worth of, from your annual tax bill. And that $300 goes for police, fire service, and roads, and the planning department, and the city administrator, and city council wages, and that kind of stuff. So it's a very complex question. And
The other issue too is that, let's talk out of turn here, but, I mean, we were talking a little bit about the traffic issues that we have. And so when we're talking about increasing growth here with developments and everything, somehow we have to figure out how the traffic is going to get, and I think, isn't the state kind of in charge of the highway and making those decisions? So
Well-
that's kind of an impediment that we have to face.
We're working with our legislative representatives on that. We're working very closely with them. So with the state and with our legislative representatives, because we have some serious traffic issues we have to
Yeah.
address. But should we get back?
Yeah, and another thing I will have a conversation, bring you up to date with, is we've been having a conversation about our transportation improvement program and figuring out what are the kind of small and medium projects that the city can tackle versus what are the big state and federal projects that
I should talk to you.
we need to get involved with.
Get more educated.
So yeah, so we had the start of that conversation probably just a couple months ago, and it will continue to evolve as we start making other decisions about where the utility is going to go. It's going to directly affect where those trips go and as homes and businesses are built. Right now, we have the bare bones for that discussion, but until you actually can dive into it and make some recommendations to the planning commission or to the city council, that's bare bones is all we have.
Where are we on the agenda?
So that really kind of brings you up to speed on kind of laying the groundwork for the discussions of growth projections. I don't know if you necessarily want to go through zoning. We've been here for about an hour and 15 minutes.
Travis, can I make one brief comment? Just tie up the comprehensive plan discussion.
Sure.
And perhaps Commissioner Jensen might appreciate this. One of the real opportunities you have in redoing your comprehensive plan right now is, and for reasons I think I share with Travis, that your comprehensive, and I'll use Clark County's comprehensive plan as a contrary example. They have a specific deduction from their land inventory for critical areas, wetlands, stream buffers, floodplains in this case. None of that is included in your current comprehensive plan. There's no mention whatsoever of critical areas in your comprehensive plan to the extent that it affects your land capacities. So, to me, that's a real opportunity for the city to go back through its comprehensive plan, identify the areas it would like to protect, and write those out of the plan. We encourage you to do that because we don't want to pretend like we're building in a wetland or too close to a stream bank or anything, or pretend that you're gonna zone property to do that when in fact you can't, which is exactly what's happened on the east side of Lewis River Road, going out at by the church there. So that was the only thing I wanted to add, is that critical areas can really be an important part of this process, and they should be.
Thank you. Anything else, Travis?
I think they actually hit a couple of the things, the points that I wanted to make on the zoning, and that is the one critical problem that we currently have with our code is the percentage, the lot percentage. And it came into play on Sequoia Park because with 24-foot wide lots, the 35% was
Talking maximum coverage?
yeah, lot coverage. So it affects something, and it's one of those things where,
That does seem really low. Is that?
yeah, and I believe it was Phil who mentioned that in Clark County it can go up to 75 or 85% with bonuses. That's one of the things I think where we would, where we can take a look at our planned unit development, and that is, you can go to higher percentage on the lot in return for things like small neighborhood visitors parking lots or open space and parks and rec, preservation of wetlands for open space is the kind of thing that should traditionally allow you to build larger footprints, larger buildings, which help you recoup some of the costs and make it more economically viable to preserve wetlands and open space and provide neighborhood parking instead of expecting everybody to be on street. So part of the reason why they're here is to help us understand that economic connection between, I can write code that says they have to have it, but if we don't get any development because they can't meet our code standards, it doesn't do us any good.
Well, we'll also have to address the amount of impervious surface and stormwater runoff and those issues, because those are key components in this, because
Which is part of the reason why I was fishing for an answer from Patrick from the Diking District, because theoretically one of the simple answers might be if we can create a stormwater utility where all of the stormwater gets shunted to pipes in the street and the pipes take it to a large regional pond, and the Diking District controls the level of that pond because they pipe it into the Columbia River. All of a sudden what you have is you don't have to have those ugly stormwater ponds at the entrance to every subdivision. What you have is extra yard space, extra developable that provides some economic benefit.
we have to get, I mean, I know from the code and from previous building code stuff, we have to really address and understand infiltration. Because when you're out, like where I live on Lewis River Road, you could, the infiltration is instantaneous because I'm on the sand. But I mean, we need to adjust for that because we don't need to be charging developers all this money for high-cost infiltration systems when it infiltrates back into the natural area. So, I mean, that's one way to, if we're going to encourage development, the right kind of development, and work with developers, we've got to have a good understanding of what really takes place. I know for a fact that the center infiltration were used in Woodland, and it's not geologically the same material, and it's cost a lot of people a lot of money putting in roads and infiltration galleries and all these different things when it wasn't necessary. So those are other things that you should make a note of that we should deal with, because that's a way to save them money by dealing with it right in the first place.
And Phil actually brought that up in his conversation. He said, developers are getting to the point where you have to do more than just the basic engineering before you get started, because getting an approved subdivision and then finding out that your stormwater ponds are a quarter of the size they need, or maybe they're 4 times the size they need, that's three more lots that
And
they
that
could
benefits
get.
them, and that benefits us as a city. But there's been a total, from my technical background in hydrogeology, there's been a total lack of understanding of that in the city.
So
What I would say is I think that's important to consider as you look at the assumptions that you use in the comprehensive plan, like Steve was talking about for land sizing, I mean, for each individual development, the first guys we have on the ground are our biologists and our geotechnical engineers. So when you get down to project-specific property evaluation, we're not going to have an incorrect storm design. We're going to go out, find out what the specific infiltration is and all that stuff. But when you're planning on a community-wide basis, right, you want to have decent assumptions that you're applying, so you know how much land's going to be taken up with those
And
facilities.
you've got to have somebody who understands the geology of the area you're going to build in.
So I'm familiar with stormwater to some degree. And the Western Washington manual, and there are a lot of options other than stormwater ponds. I don't know why. I mean, people talk about having to build stormwater ponds, but that's not the only option.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's the
Yeah,
kind of dumbest option.
I actually helped draft the Clark County Stormwater Code. I was on the code committee, so I'm fairly familiar with it too. That is why we've chosen the bottoms as an opportunity for development, because one of the carve-outs from infiltration, because nothing in the woodland bottoms infiltrates. It just doesn't. It's like a bathtub. I mean, you're below the level of the Columbia River. So there's nowhere for water to infiltrate. So your only option, which the stormwater manual allows for, is what we call direct discharge. And in this case, it would be through the Diking District pumps. So they're in effect, if you're developing in a diked area, a legally diked area in Western Washington under the stormwater manual, you meet all the requirements. There's like 9 minimum requirements, right? And you meet all of them if you can establish the criteria for direct discharge, which our Diking District meets. So that's the answer to your question there. In other areas of the city, for sure, there's challenges. But that, again, that's what makes that particular area so attractive from a developer standpoint.
Patrick mentioned the high school had to elevate their site 3 to 4 feet just to get the ground level, but you have to have, I think it's 3 feet of separation between ground level and the bottom of your pond. And so literally, Patrick just mentioned that the high school had to elevate for that exact reason.
But if they're also in the Diking District, why would they have to? Couldn't they just do the direct district?
Sorry?
If they were also in the, like Steve's talking about, that's in the Diking District, why?
They don't have discharge. I'm on the school board too. We don't have discharge.
That was your idea, putting it out there?
Huh?
That was your idea then, putting it out there? High
Yes, it
school?
was. I stand by it.
Noted.
So, yes, where are we?
So that's pretty much the extent of the conversation I had prepared for tonight.
Okay.
So if you,
I did, sorry, I found one thing I wanted to talk about. We started talking about planned unit developments a little bit. That being one avenue for allowing some higher densities than we might otherwise. And I think, I like that idea, but I feel like I want there to be a way for that to happen on less than a third scale. Because I feel like that removes it from the realm of anybody but your Gins and your Ahos and your large developers. And thanks for coming. You seem like great folks. But you also seem like you're doing all right. And I don't want to stick it to those guys, but I also don't think
sure.
that those are the only people that we're thinking of. I'm interested in helping them, small developers as well.
Yeah, that's a
Who
good
might
point.
do like a lot or two and not.
So what I can do next for our next meeting is I can do some analysis and have a conversation about our existing code, which is actually the PURD. It's the Planned Unit Residential District Code. So I can talk about that, and then I can introduce some conversations of, we'll look at Clark County and figure out what are some pros and cons about the Clark County code that we could consider in ours. Typically, those are for larger projects that kind of reach or oddly shaped or constrained properties that kind of have to go outside of the typical cookie cutter subdivision to accommodate site conditions. Our code has kind of a quirk in that it always kind of runs home to mama. The single-family residential is always an option, even in our medium and high density. So even our zones where we try and encourage higher densities, it always allows, if you have a piece of property that's zoned high-density residential, but it's too small to develop, you could apply for a subdivision and build single-family homes on it. So it's almost counterintuitive that that's always the safe harbor to go back to, which leads us to the question of, well, A, why was it zoned that way? Did it make sense to even do that in the first place? And do we want to continue making that mistake, or do we want to fix the code, or do we just want to do a smarter job at designating our medium and high density zone properties in our growth area if we go in that direction? So. So planned unit residential development, I will bring in some Clark County, the planned unit development, and we can talk about what we like and don't like. Potentially, we might be able to get some additional input from developers who might be interested in helping us at least help me do some of that analysis and have that conversation with you again next month.
I'm still very interested in an actual analysis that I came in and discussed with you about what we have, how many units per mobile home park, because we need to understand what we have if we're going to move forward in a...
Okay, so you want that
intelligent.
by type of housing? And
Yeah,
do you
I
want
want-
that on, or a vacant lands analysis as well? Would that be helpful?
I want it all. I want to understand, because if we're going to move forward and in a meaningful way, we need to understand that, how much is in the city, and if we do, when we expand our urban growth boundary, what we want. Do we want? We need to know actually how many single-family residences we have, and high density, medium density. I mean, when I met with you, you said you kind of had that, so I'd really like to see some of that. Because that really folds into the comprehensive plan and what we do there. Thanks.
Anything else anybody would like me to look into and get back to you?
Sounds plenty.
Okay. So I think that just leaves staff reports.
Okay.
For some updates on the current workload. So we've had a lot of permitting activity. The Arco station, which is across from the Taco Bell, they've kind of looking back and they're reevaluating. Thank you very much. They're looking back and reevaluating the truck stop portion of their development because they couldn't get their stormwater. It looks like their stormwater was the limiting constraint, and so they had too much impervious surfacing for the amount of water that they could infiltrate, so they've essentially eliminated all of the truck, and they're going to add a car wash, so they'll be coming in for revised applications on that. The fire station is now occupied by Clark County Fire and Rescue, so if you want to stop by there, they'll be happy to show off their fancy new building. And that's, of course, just right next door. Be Young RV have their preliminary approvals, and they are working on preparing their building permit applications for submittal. So they're making progress. The Gilmore short plat is recorded, and Mr. Gilmore has both of his building permits pulled, and so we started construction. That's a two-lot subdivision on Gun Club Road, in case you drive by there. The port has two industrial park phases on Guild Road. One is going to extend Howard to Guide and then the other, or Guild. And then south of Guild, they have what they call Phase 1. It's going to be coming through, so the port will be doing some major construction and development in next year, year and a half.
Those are for their own offices, or those for leasing?
I'm sorry?
What are those buildings for?
Oh, so they designed a plan that has some flexible space buildings, different sizes from small, couple thousand square feet to, I think their biggest one is 64,000 square feet. So they're going to provide a range at both different sites for occupants to come in. My understanding is they will all be leased, they will not be sold. So the port will maintain the district themselves, or maintain the industrial park themselves. The little home there on Guild next to the orchard, they have applications approved for remodeling that into their office space, so they should start on that pretty soon as well. So we'll start to see some
that's
action.
undergoing.
What's that?
I think that's already taken place.
Oh, okay. So I haven't been out there
It has
in a
been
while.
for some
so,
time.
Yeah, they've been approved for a while, so. The Hanson Motel was bought by a gentleman out of Longview who's applied for a Dutch Brothers at that location. So he's done a boundary line adjustment. They will be demolishing both of the hotel buildings, both of the motel buildings, both of the residences behind it, and then some miscellaneous residential structures back there. So those should all be removed before long. They're talking about they're talking to the fire district about doing some potential training burns at those locations. So you'll start to see progress on those pretty soon. And Trailer Depot, which is up across from I believe it's the Cellular One building across from Taco Bell at that same roundabout. They're working on a plan to move from their current location, which is kind of in the neighborhood of Lewis River Motors and the Carlson Jr. there. They'll be moving to the north end of town. So we're working with them, and they should have a decision in the next couple weeks. They're working on building designs. So that's kind of an update of the permitting stuff that's coming through. Any questions? And that's all I have. So the MRSC document that was in there, that was actually, I was asked by Mary Ripp to include that to you, so I'm not sure. I believe it was the result of a request by Ms. Jones. Oh,
It was me.
Ms. Taylor.
Well, actually, I didn't ask her to include it here, but basically, it's important as commissioners that we understand how to use the email, and although we're not elected, if you sign in to the city email, you're protected because you're signing on to the city site. But if you're accepting email on your personal devices, if there's a subpoena or any kind of FOIA, you could have to turn over your device. So all commissioners need to be very careful with that.
My understanding is, from what Mary sent that I forwarded to you, that you each need to go through the training. It's a simple training session, and be tested and update that each year, I believe, or every 4 years or something. I'm not certain of the time frame, but all officials are subject to that information and should be aware of it. So, if you have any questions, you can contact Mary Ripp at City Hall. She should be able to help you with that.
Yeah, and you're right. You didn't ask for this to be on here, but Mary had suggested that.
Yeah, she gave me a bunch of information because I wasn't going to, I need to protect. I have a lot of things in my personal devices, and I was not going to turn them over to the city. So, okay.
Okay, so do we have a motion to adjourn?
Madam Chair, I move that we adjourn this meeting.
Second?
Second?
All right. Made and second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So we are closing the public meeting at 9:05 p.m.
Great work, everybody.
How was it?